As the last ones are moving into the room and hopefully finding a seat, I'm glad to see that it's so many people coming to this side event. I wanted to start by welcoming you all to this side event organized by Norwegian People's Aid in collaboration with the international campaign to ban landmines. It's called Backsliding on Humanity and what treaty withdrawals can mean for global humanitarian norms. Let me start by setting the scene before we move to our panel. Amid ongoing geopolitical tensions and increasing challenges to norms of international humanitarian law, the discussion today will address three core concepts. The Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention's enduring relevance to IHL, civilian protection, and effective humanitarian action. Number two, I see will compete with the neighboring room. The imperatives behind the treaty's initial adoption and continued universalization. And three, the supposed military utility of anti-personnel and non-persistent mines. As the title of the event suggests, concern has been raised over what treaty withdrawals may mean for global humanitarian norms. The 2024 Human Development Report, as well as the UN Secretary General's report on the protection of civilians, empirically documents what it is now also frequently displayed in media, that civilian fatalities as a result of conflict are surging after years of decline, in part due to the increased and changing nature of warfare with an apparent increased disregard for the rules of war, especially in the principles of distinction and proportionality. In 2024 as well, a state party announced withdrawal from the Convention on Cluster Munitions, effectively becoming the first ever case of withdrawal of a state from a multilateral treaty prohibiting a whole category of weapons. Concern was raised that this could create a precedent with long-term repercussions for the norms established by the Convention. The recent announcements, therefore, by 5 states having initiated discussions of withdrawal from the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention are therefore alarming. It also raises questions with regards to the security cover sought with outdated measures in response to today's technologically advanced means of warfare. Today's event aims to address some of these arguments used to legitimize this course of action, including that of a perceived military utility being allowed to overshadow the overwhelming evidence of civilian harm. Increasingly evident, therefore, this is as much about how states relate to the upholding of international law and international humanitarian law. While the well-being of both civilians and combatants in mind, the well-being of both civilians and combatants in mind, international humanitarian law is more than just a framework for military technology. It also shapes the morality of conflict. We will hear of the legacy of trauma from indiscriminate weapon use that continues to divide communities decades later, and that in a time of heightened insecurity and record military spending, IHL remains a crucial guardrail of how wars are fought and measured. I am Sarah Sekenes-Tollefsen, and I've been asked to facilitate this discussion. I attended my first Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention meeting a while ago in 2001, whilst stationed in Angola doing landmine survey. Many more ever since. Following this, I've been working in mine action in Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and in Southeast Asia, both for NGOs and the UNDP, rounding up as UN Resident Coordinator in Laos PDR. Yet another country heavily affected by war. Now, to hear more on this, I turn to the panel. We have 6 excellent panelists, specialists from diverse sectors, including Mr. Steffen Kongstad, representing Norwegian People's Aid, Madam Alma Tajlichan, from Humanity and Inclusion, representing International Campaign to Ban Landmines, Mr. Dejan Ivanovic from Assistance Advocacy Access, also ICBL, Madam Cordula Drogi from International Committee of the Red Cross, and online, as this is a global initiative, from Australia we have, I hope, there we go, Jonathan Guthrie, or Gus as many will know him, from Norwegian People's Aid. And last but not least, Madam Tsolofelo Tsiole from the South African Permanent Mission. She's Deputy Permanent Representative of South Africa here in Geneva. I will present each of them in more detail as we move along, but with the aim of achieving a more interactive debate, I've asked them first to give us a few reflections on areas relevant to their background, experience, and to this discussion. And thereafter, we'll proceed towards a moderated discussion, giving, I hope, space also for a Q&A and room for those in the room to join us in the discussion. So first on this, a little bit of history. I turn to Mr. Stefan Kungstad. He has worked for more than 40 years in the Norwegian Foreign Service, mostly on either security policy or humanitarian affairs, and often, as it were, both intertwined. He was among key persons involved in the early work to address the humanitarian consequences of both antipersonnel landmines and cluster munitions, and somewhat of an encyclopedia on all matters concerned. Following his retirement from civil service, he now works very actively for the Norwegian People's Aid on a range of weapons-related issues. Stefan, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Well, when you are called an encyclopedia, it's probably time to quit. But I was asked to go a bit back in time, and I want to make 3 points. The background, what was the situation when the process against antipersonnel mines started. And because the Antipersonnel Mine Ban Convention, many people do not remember or are not aware of the humanitarian disaster that had been building up, especially since the 1960s. And with the wars in Southeast Asia, the colonial wars in Africa, several conflicts in Latin America, Afghanistan, and the Middle East, the use of antipersonnel mine had become what ICRC called epidemic, with growing casualty rates, mostly civilians, including large numbers of children. And the humanitarian and social and economic consequences were appalling and growing. And that was the setting when a global movement against landmines started to be formed in the early 1990s. ICBL was founded in 1992. Certain states started to discuss how to address the landmine problem at the time. My second point is that, contrary to popular thinking, the journey towards a mine ban convention was no plain sailing. There was broad opposition from governments, partly because the widespread deployment of antipersonnel mines, they were considered as a common and acceptable weapon that was an integrated part of war plans and training. And about 125 states had stockpiles of antipersonnel mines, and these mines had been used in about 90 countries. And the strongest opposition came from countries like the US, Russia, and China, and partly due to the outdated military thinking, coupled with few or no humanitarian considerations, partly because they would not accept processes they could not control. Especially the US actively tried to stop a ban on antipersonnel mines till the very end of the treaty negotiations that took place in Oslo in 1997. So, my third point is, how was it possible to conclude a meaningful treaty? Firstly, I think it was important. That is what made a clear distinction between anti-vehicle mines and anti-personnel mines. 3 decades ago, the use of anti-personnel mines was the humanitarian problem, and the use of these mines had no real significant military value. Anti-vehicle mines, that's a different story. It seems that there are people in today's Europe unaware of the difference between the two. We may come back to that. So I just want to make a few remarks on the process and the treaty itself. Both represented something new at the time. But for the benefit of time today, my remarks are very simplified and there are obviously several other factors making the process possible. It is important to remember that the process was ignited and fueled by the humanitarian imperative. That is why affected countries, communities, and individuals played a crucial role in the process. And most of the affected were in the global south. And it was indeed more than pertinent than the diplomatic conference negotiating the convention was chaired by South Africa, and that the first meeting of states parties took place in Maputo in Mozambique. And these countries and other countries in the south, affected or not, have provided consistent, sustained support for the convention. The process required different partnerships. One was a cross-regional group of countries. All regions were represented. Another, and very close cooperation between states, civil society organizations, and international humanitarian organizations like the ICRC, and field-based UN organizations like the UNHCR. The experience and expertise from the field that various humanitarian organizations could provide was essential for the government bureaucrats to develop policy positions and treaty provisions. In total, it was a campaign based on well-documented facts and evidence, contrary to what the opposition, who tried to avoid any ban treaty, were able to do. The treaty delivered a clear total ban on antipersonnel mines, but it did more, which was new for weapons-related treaties. It had provisions for recovery and prevention, but was really a novelty at the time was that the treaty included victims' assistance, despite much resistance from certain countries. I stop there.
Thank you. Thank you, Stefan. It sounds, the way that you described it, it was not, as you say, easy sailing, but it was a success. And therefore, moving over to Alma, I wanted we're going to hear her speak a little bit about the surprising limitation of reaction among states now that rumors are out that states are about to leave. What happened?
Thank you very much, Sarah, and great to see you all today here. We often get this question asked, how do you feel? How do you feel now that you see things are crumbling down? And there is this feeling of outrage. We worry, but we are outraged. We worry, but it's always a mixed feeling that we have. And sometimes I feel that a punching bag would be a great accessory to have in the office. But why? For decades, we fought to build this global consensus, a norm. A landmine is a cruel weapon. It's indiscriminate weapon of war. We worked across borders, as Stefan explained, across difficult political divides as well, and across generations to say this ends here. This is the weapon of past. This is a reminder that humankind can make horrible decisions, and we don't want to see this again. That happened. But now we see this norm being pushed aside, brushed away casually, just like that. And it's not just a political reversal or this strategic adjustment. Can we say that it's an act of moral vandalism? Can we say that it's a fake security promise? Because it tells the world that the suffering of civilians, children, farmers, the miners that are hardly working today, is negotiable again. It's a question on a table. Would a landmine that blew off Diane's leg would blow off less today, 30 years later? Would it be less explosive? Would it be smarter? Because last time we checked, in the 30 years, landmines did not become smarter. They cannot still distinguish a foot of a child, of a civilian, or a soldier. It cannot distinguish between the war and peace, between the past and the future. But what it can still do is contaminate. It can turn the borders into death traps. and push nations into poverty. The truth is, the norm we built was not inevitable. It took pressure, it took hard work, and it also took pain, because the survivors that were engaged in the ban process, they relived their traumas, they opened their souls and their hearts to show the world what it means to step on a landmine and what it means after, how to regain that power, dignity, and continue their life. Hundreds of deminers have lost their lives. Thousands of deminers are working on the field, clearing these weapons. I wonder how they feel when we say, well, for the defense issues, we are going to reuse them again. Nations have set aside these geopolitical interests back then to say this ends with us. We want states to do the same today. Set aside geopolitical developments and look at the civilian and humanitarian consequences, and to say it ended in 95, 97, it has to end now again. We're not naive. We know how things are happening. We knew that the ban was fragile as soon as the Convention on Cluster Munition was being eroded as well. But we cannot let it be shattered now, and this is why we need support of states. We also believe that the world, once shown the truth, will never go back to the same mistakes. It's a weapon of past. It's a mistake of past. But still, we are here forgetting. And let me say this, if we allow this erosion of the norm, we are complicit in the future suffering. In 10 years, we're going to sit, maybe some of us will be retired, we're going to come back to this moment and we're going to regret that we were not stronger. It was just about changing few words in the statement to show support for a humanitarian cause. And we will regret that we did not push that forward, that we did not challenge the states even more to defend this treaty. It's not a landmine issue only, it's an issue of justice, of human rights, of human dignity. And let us reignite this rage. Do not be angry with us if we organize protests. We are going back to the very basics, or that we hang a banner, rightfully so, shaming states. This is our job and we need to do it, because we do not want to regret 10 years after that we did not do everything that we could. We build the norm together. We have to defend it together, because we all know too well what are landmines, what they do, and who they harm the most. I will stop here and back to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Alma. We're going to get back to that last point. But I wanted to thank you for those words, noting that you've dedicated your profession to making sure that victims and affected communities' voices come to these dialogues and discussions in meeting rooms, so to say. Alma works as the advocacy manager at Humanity and Inclusion, based in Brussels, covering disarmament and protection of civilian issues. She's also the chair of the ICBL Governance Board. Okay, let's move to the next one. Dejan, you have a first encounter on this. You're a survivor from anti-personnel mines during the 1998-99 war, and a former soldier of the Croatian army, and you've also worked in demining. He represents the ICBL on Assistance Advocacy Axis and is a war veteran today, of course, and disability rights advocate. Sorry. Please, tell us about what it actually means with anti-personnel mines in the fields.
Landmines, anti-personnel mines are very, very bad things because they never don't sleep. They don't made different civilians and soldiers. I will love too much to show you one hand grenade. It is old 100 years. We got accident three years ago, the some worker on the job, he find that's grenade and he lost legs, hands, and half mounts, and he was very, very bad. Why I show it for him? So, and landmines, antipersonnel mines, living very, very long. So, I can't understand what is smart landmines or antipersonnel mines. How they work? First, it is I never see it. So now is period when must somebody to produce smart landmines. How we can believe today? Many basic things is it made human. It will make human, and everything what human to make, so we have space for mistakes. I will stop here if it's okay.
Thank you, Dayan. Of course, I understand that it's not easy to talk about this, and English is also not your first language, but what comes clearly out is that having been both a soldier and presumably involved in using weapons, then going over to demining and becoming a survivor, the way that has completely changed your view on the utility of this. It's very clear. It's very clear, and your voice is very important in that regard. Thank you so much. Let's continue with these opening remarks from each of the panelists. I'll follow Dayan with from ICRC, which is the custodian of the Geneva Conventions, with Madame Droge to share some of the thoughts on the broader implications of withdrawals from humanitarian disarmament treaties for IHL and international law. Dr. Droge is Chief Legal Officer and Head of the Legal Division at ICRC, where she leads efforts to uphold and develop international humanitarian law. Madame Droge, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thanks for inviting the ICRC to this panel. A couple of remarks on what it means to withdraw from humanitarian treaties. I think we have to go back to what humanitarian law treaties are about, and that includes humanitarian disarmament treaties. They are to protect victims of war. So they are made for war. That's what they are drafted for. And they are drafted to protect civilians, and as Stefan was very well explaining, the evidence that anti-personnel mines most predominantly affect civilians and kill 80% on average of civilians, many women and children, is the evidence which makes it clear that these mines cannot differentiate between combatants and civilians and have indiscriminate effects. And that's why they were banned, and they were banned at the time because the argument that they had military utility that outweighed the humanitarian consequences did not hold sway. And on the contrary, the decision was made to say whatever the military utility, the humanitarian consequences are such that we need to ban these mines. And what has changed? Nothing has changed. The anti-personnel mine treaty is still made for wars. So the argument to say, now that we are facing war, we have to leave the convention, completely misunderstands the content and the significance and the intent of the treaty. And the argument to say they have military utility and therefore we leave the convention because we need them now also hasn't changed, because the military utility of these mines hasn't changed and the humanitarian consequences haven't changed. They still when they are used, and unfortunately they are still being used, and we have unfortunately seen a rise in the use of anti-personnel mines after we saw a great dip in their use, and that is very worrying. And where they are used, they still produce 80% civilians, so nothing has changed. And therefore, these norms have to be upheld. Now, I want to say something, though, on the backsliding from humanity, which is the title of the panel today. And I think we have to be careful to not make self-fulfilling prophecies. This convention is still ratified, and there are 165 states parties to this treaty. There are many, many parties to this treaty. 5 states have left or are leaving. There are still many, many, many parties to this treaty. What does it mean for international humanitarian law? International law and international humanitarian law was always carried, if I can put it that way, by the middle. You explained very well the states that pushed for this convention to be adopted, whose civilians were the victims of these landmines. And today, just as then, I think it has to be the middle that upholds international humanitarian law. And what does that mean? It means numbers. So we have to urge all states to still continue to work for the universalization of these treaties. There are still other states that haven't, regardless of those that are now leaving, there are still states that should join the treaty, and we need to continue working on that, just as the cluster munitions conventions as well. And it also means voice. The middle has to have a voice, and it has to have a louder voice, and it means that you have to speak up when international humanitarian law, including the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention, but so much else of international humanitarian law now, is being disregarded. And the silence in the face of this disregard, and the silence in the face of this quiet quitting is deafening. And that's where I think we really need to hear more states speak up, including when it's your allies that commit violations, that disregard treaties, that make statements that are entirely incompatible with international humanitarian law, and if they leave the treaties. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Dröge. And indeed, as you mentioned, the use of anti-personnel mines has gone up. The number of new victims has gone up. But it actually proves that the 30 years where there were relatively few proves that the treaty works. Right? So it's an important point to make in and of itself. Thank you again. We now turn to Australia. Gus, who currently works for MPA's MPA's Global Director of Operations. If we can see if we can get, there he is. He's served in the Australian Army for 12 years as military engineer and explosive ordnance disposal officer, conducting multiple operations tours. For the past 20 years, I believe, he's been working in humanitarian mine action throughout Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East. Can you give us some perspectives from your experience?
Yeah, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to take the opportunity to raise 3 key points related to anti-personnel mines, and more importantly, their lack of military utility. And the first one is building on what Stefan has already mentioned, and that is it's extremely important to differentiate between anti-vehicular mines and anti-personnel mines. Often the difference is simply not known, or if it is known, it's just simply ignored, and often for political purposes. A landmine is simply not a landmine. The humanitarian consequences and the military utility differ greatly between an anti-personnel mine and an anti-vehicular mine. And I think it's very important to point out that while anti-personnel mines are subject to an absolute ban under the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention, anti-vehicular mines are not. The second point that I wanted to raise is this misconception that anti-personnel mines protect borders. They do not. Modern forces are mobile. They're moving either by light vehicles, armored vehicles, or even air mobile. It's not since World War II that we've seen masses of troops marching across borders to invade countries and march into combat. And anti-personnel mines are also extremely easy to breach from a military perspective, using rapidly deployed remote explosive means, etc., to breach lanes which are not cleared to a humanitarian standard, but allow for the rapid deployment of troops. So therefore, the anti-personnel mines used to protect a country from an advancing force on their border just doesn't make military sense. And the third point is there is no responsible use of anti-personnel mines. They lay dormant for years, as most of our speakers have already mentioned. Civilians don't know where they exist. And the result is decades of high cost to civilians through loss of life and limb, and high cost to governments to remove them for decades to come. So they're kind of the three main points that I wanted to share with everybody today, and I'm looking forward to further discussions throughout this session. Thank you very much. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Gus. While I have you online, being afraid of a technological breakdown here, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question to make sure that we get a little bit more of you. Can you elaborate a little bit more on your experience in clearance of border areas?
Yeah, absolutely. MPA has and does conduct border minefield clearance in many countries, from Africa to the Middle East, Europe, Central and Southeast Asia, and even South America. In all examples, there have been times where there have been maps available, and there have been times where maps have not been available. And regardless, we always see the same results. One, civilians don't have access to maps, and mines remain dormant and kill and maim indiscriminately. So regardless if there was a map, the population doesn't have that map. Survey and clearance proves inaccurate or the inaccuracy of those maps, resulting in greater costs and to clearance in order to find that last mine, that last missing mine that we need to find. And time and unpredictable events such as natural disasters, climate change, etc., result in the migration of mines. And this migration of mines then also adds to greater costs of clearance to find that last mine. And if I could give one very, very concrete recent example of this, it would be from Ukraine, where the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam released massive amounts of water, rendering known hazardous areas into completely unknown and dangerous territory. So regardless of how well we know where a border minefield may be mined and where the mines are today, tomorrow it could be a completely different picture. Thank you.
Thank you, Gus. We're not going to let you off the hook yet, as long as it holds. I know it's in the middle of the night for you. Let's turn to our last panelist before we pose a few questions and also open for the floor. South Africa has been, and indeed still is, very active both in the past when they presided over the negotiations in Oslo on the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention. And they've also since then taken a lead position amongst African states, in particular, ensuring regional engagement and rallying voices from affected states. And following that path, we've asked Deputy Permanent Representative Solofelo Siole to speak to the global nature of this work and the benefits it has generated for affected states in particular, and the experience that has been shared across regions to the benefit of those taking part of the Mine Ban Convention. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sarah. Moderator, Excellencies, colleagues, thank you for the opportunity for me to participate in this panel discussion. We are of the view that it is a critical topic and it comes at a very pivotal moment. Amid contemporary geopolitical tensions and increasing challenges to the established norms of international humanitarian law, and therefore the relevance of the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention, as we stand today, is not diminished. It is actually vital and more vital than it has ever been. As you have said, and I think Stefan also mentioned, South Africa has long been an advocate for the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention. We have played a critical role in shaping the global framework for the elimination of these weapons, and our engagement began during the negotiations that led to the convention in the 1990s, where we worked very closely with like-minded states to secure an international ban on landmines. Indeed, South Africa played a central role in the negotiations as the then chair of the 1997 Oslo Diplomatic Conference. Again, as mentioned earlier by Stefan, South Africa, following attempts by some countries that tried to undermine the process, our late former statesman Nelson Mandela took charge and became key in ensuring that those that were participating in the conference stood firm. In so doing, he believed that South Africa had a moral duty to end the suffering, given our shameful past of apartheid, where anti-personnel mines were used to terrorize our neighbors. As a former producer and exporter of anti-personnel mines, South Africa dismantled production capacity and ceased all production in 1995. And that act on its own is a reflection of our determination to contribute to a mine-free world. We ratified the convention in 1998, and it entered into force for South Africa on 1 March 1999. This commitment is further enshrined in our national legislation, the Anti-Personnel Mine Prohibition Bill, which aligns fully with the Convention's legally binding obligations. South Africa's role in the APMBC continues to evolve today, particularly through our active participation both internationally and regionally. The idea for us is to ensure full implementation of the Convention. We have constantly advocated for the universalization, recognizing that the strength and credibility of this instrument depends on the participation of all states, particularly those most affected by landmine contamination. South Africa continues to raise awareness of the humanitarian and development consequences of landmines and promotes inclusive dialogue to address their risks. South Africa has also contributed to mine action in the SADC region, notably through its support to Mozambique. I think I saw my colleague from Mozambique earlier, particularly through its support to Mozambique's clearance efforts. I heard Elma earlier on talking about that we know the impact of landmines. Perhaps it is in times like this that we need to say it over and over again. We need to remind ourselves constantly why this convention is important, not only in a different time. Therefore, I want to go and say landmines, just as a reminder, pose a major humanitarian and development challenge, particularly in rural areas, impeding agriculture, access to water, and post-war resettlement. From providing technical expertise and defense cooperation to mobilizing international support within multilateral forums, South Africa has remained committed to regional solidarity and the principle of humanitarian disarmament. Anti-personnel mines are inherently indiscriminate. Their continued use, often decades after conflicts have ceased, poses great threats to civilians, obstruct humanitarian access, and hinders reconstruction and development. Their use stands in direct contradiction to the fundamental principles of international humanitarian law, namely distinction, proportionality, and precaution, which are binding to all parties to armed conflict and central to the protection of civilians. We firmly believe that this convention is one of the most successful examples of humanitarian disarmament. The motivations behind its adoption, which is the protection of civilian adherence to international law and the facilitation of effective humanitarian response, remains as relevant today as when the treaty was negotiated. Therefore, we must not allow current conflict dynamics or political considerations to undermine the legal and moral authority of this convention. Equally, we must challenge the notion that anti-personnel mines retain legitimate military utility. Any perceived tactical advantage must be weighed against long-term disproportionate harm to civilian populations. Decades of humanitarian fieldwork and post-conflict recovery have shown that these weapons often result in greater strategic harm, undermining military legitimacy and prolonging insecurity. South Africa is particularly concerned by recent discourse on potential withdrawals from the convention. While the sovereign right to withdraw is acknowledged by Article 20, it must be weighed against the collective responsibility we all share to uphold humanitarian aims and legal principles that underpins this treaty. Withdrawals risk reversing hard-won progress and weakening the normative framework that has saved countless lives and enabled post-conflict recovery in some of the world's most fragile regions, Africa being amongst them. Importantly, in the context of international humanitarian law, the principle of non-reciprocity is foundational. Obligations under IHL apply regardless of the conduct or legal status of adversaries. States are bound to uphold these norms even in the face of non-compliance by others. This underscores the importance of preserving the Convention's integrity. The use of threat of withdrawal as a response to the behavior of non-parties undermines the very essence of IHL. Given the complexities and gravity of such consideration, this issue warrants careful and principled scrutiny. Engaging with it through a thorough lens, particularly in terms of the obligations of states versus non-parties, would help ensure that humanitarian and legal imperatives of the Convention are not eroded, but rather reinforced. The issue can therefore not be left unattended. South Africa therefore proposes that the matter of potential withdrawal be formally addressed within the framework of the Convention, possibly under universalization agenda. Through the establishment of a dedicated working group, such a platform would then provide space for dialogue, identify the root causes of withdrawal considerations, and propose solutions to re-engage consent states. We also draw attention to relevant UNGA resolutions. A few that I can mention is Resolution 78/91 on assistance in mine action, Resolution 77/104 on the protection of civilians in armed conflict, and Resolution 78/124 on the protection of humanitarian law, all of which reaffirm the importance of adhering to international humanitarian law and the prohibition of indiscriminate weapons such as anti-personnel mines. In closing, Madam Moderator, South Africa calls on all states parties to reaffirm their commitment to this convention, not only as a disarmament treaty, but as a humanitarian imperative. Upholding its integrity means standing firm on its legal foundations, defending its humanitarian objectives, and resisting any erosions of the norms it has so successfully established. I think I can put a pause here. Thank you.
Thank you. Talk about a beacon of reasoning, and that was also picking up on your call of standing up and speaking out to the importance of, amongst all those states parties that are firm believers in this treaty. Very good to hear. I wanted to pick up on some of the lines, if you wish, or the arguments that has been raised by such states that are considering leaving. And amongst them, if I can turn to you, Stefan, first, there are arguments saying that the security environment in Europe, in particular, has changed fundamentally, and that we therefore need to adapt to the new situation. Putting that into the context of today's discussion, adapt IHL then too? Wouldn't that defeat the purpose of IHL?
The short answer to that is definitely yes. To me, it's a rather absurd proposition that when there is a security situation where we may face armed conflict, war, then you abandon the laws of war. That is, to me, quite absurd. But there is also, I sense, another underlying thing here, talking about European security circumstances, that's different from European security circumstances elsewhere. And I think then we are close to talking about double standards, which is also an important issue on this matter.
Thank you, Stefan. Let me turn to Alma on that point. How do you feel about that rationale raised that some countries that are facing what they call exceptional situations would justify leaving the convention, whereas the rules and regulations of IHL are very firm and customary law?
There is this sentence that we have heard in the last year, and it's, we must have the freedom to do anything and everything to protect our people. I don't see a red line there, and this red line is very important for us. Last year, we had witnessed withdrawal of Lithuania from the conventional cluster munitions. I spoke to a delegate, he shall not be named here, and he said, oh, we would never let this with landmines. It would be unacceptable because the landmine treaty is such a strong humanitarian instrument that would never happen. And then there was another step that I think made this situation even worse, and that was the transfer of landmines, where states accepted that move with silence, and that red line just disappeared. So now, what happens when we hear that states will do everything, that they have the power, the willingness to do anything, and then this anything becomes acceptable, and then everything becomes permissible, and there is no end to that. So landmines was that red line that we wanted states not to cross, these withdrawing states not to cross. And they were banned not only for their effects in the war, but as it was previously mentioned, the devastation and peace. And this is what we have been seeing from the modern warfare. It is shifting its logic. Wars are becoming more and more horrible. The norms are being watered down and washed down. And states once proud to sign this mine-ban treaty are now saying, justifying their retreat from it by invoking national security. Well, national security built on the worst indiscriminate weapons is not a strength. If landmines are not crossing that red line, what is crossing? Is it indiscriminate incendiary weapon? Is it chemical agents? Is it biological weapons? When does it stop if it just keeps shifting more and more? And I hear what Cordula was saying. There are still 165 states that are state parties of the treaty. And we have to make sure that we remain that number for this not to happen. Again, on this freedom to do anything to protect the people, it also is an argument assuming a bit of a, I don't want to say lie, but not truth, because that protection can be separated from the principle, and it cannot. Again, modern warfare is really stretching the rules of warfare. Protection of civilians is just some concept that we cannot reach anymore. But this treaty was really a moral anchor that we had, and withdrawing from it doesn't just signal tactical shift. It says we're willing to hurt our own civilians to protect states' interests. And let's remember, the strength of the nation is not in the weapons that they possess, but it's in the lines it refuses to cross to protect their own people. And landmines are those lines that we have to keep. How we see it is that it's a bit of a slippery slope with this anything goes along. It's hard to stop when we keep pulling everything that we have. And we want to make sure that this ban on landmines is not seen as a restriction to security. It is a guarantee of lasting safety. It prevents war from outliving itself, because if the war stops, if landmine is there, it's an ongoing war that goes in the country itself. Just a reminder, the Mine Ban Treaty said, here at least we agree no more. And I have a feeling that this modern warfare is trying to rewrite this agreement, and we should not let that happen. These 165 states should defend that sentence that we all agree on. We will be seeing shattering of the norms, rebuilding the trust of the generations that will suffer, like we see generations suffering right now. And the truth is, the real strength is not doing everything that you can. The real strength is building security and defense strategy by putting the civilian in the center of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alma. I saw you sparked some reaction with Stefan here.
No, just to follow up what Alma said on the protection of civilians and how the limits are being pushed. Civilians have always been victims of war, but I think we are seeing a trend now where civilians are going from being what we call collateral damage to being explicit targets of warfare. I think that's something to be very much aware of.
Thank you. I'll come back to you. I wanted to ask Gus on following a point that Alma said also. Gus, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yep, he's there. Another thing that has been floating in the air is the notion of responsible use of antipersonnel mines. How would you respond to the claim that antipersonnel mines could be used responsibly?
Yeah, at the risk of sounding a little bit arrogant, I just would not respond. I mean, how can you responsibly use a weapon that cannot be controlled? They don't, they do not discriminate, meaning that you can't tell it when to engage the enemy and when not to. You can't tell it when the target is friendly or civilian. It will just kill. Not just during combat, but also civilians for many, many years following combat. And history has proven this. This is why we have a convention in the first place. So, they simply just should not be used, period. And today, with technical advantages that we have, or the technical advances that we have, you can deter, you can delay, and you can prevent advancing troops through multiple means that do not cause civilian harm at all. And just maybe piggybacking off something that Alma had mentioned earlier on about, mines are not smart. And there's this myth that there's this so-called smart mines. Well, the industry hasn't seen any major developments in anti-personnel mines of those that are being held by the non-signatory states compared to those that they held back in the 90s. So this myth of this so-called smart anti-personnel mine is simply that. It's a myth. So, yeah, at the risk of sounding a little bit arrogant, I just simply would not respond when people ask me that question.
Thank you, Gus. I think that says it all in that sense. Other things that has been said in the context of either ICBL actors approaching these states or some statements that have been made in the context of considering leaving these conventions has been to say, we're leaving because we want to show respect to IHL. Cordula, can I turn to you? Does that make sense?
Well, that's like you're saying, I'm going to go to war and I'll leave the Geneva Convention so I can respect IHL and I won't be in violation of them. I mean, as Gus said, you know, there's hardly any response to this. To say you're going to leave a treaty because you want to not disrespect it is just to say, I don't want to respect this treaty, that's why I'm leaving it. So I think we have to have no illusion.
Thank you. Please add if you had.
Just 2 points following on from both what Alma said and what Gus said. And, you know, Alma said it so clearly. When you hear states saying, you know, we need to do anything and we want to do anything and everything to defend ourselves, basically says when we are in a situation of self-defense, we are not bound by any laws. And that statement is just legally wrong. You know, even a state that acts in self-defense has to respect international humanitarian law. So, and when states, and that then leads me to the follow-up on what Gus was saying about the responsible use. And to say there's no responsible use is the same as legally saying there is no use that can be compatible with international humanitarian law. And the reason for that is there's a prohibition in international humanitarian law of using indiscriminate weapons or committing indiscriminate attacks. And indiscriminate means is that you cannot differentiate between civilians and combatants. And as we heard, the point of anti-personnel mines, the way they work is that someone steps on them and the mine is activated, and the mine, of course, cannot differentiate between whether that person is a civilian or a combatant. That is simply not possible. And the argument, and this was also the argument during the drafting of the convention, the negotiations, was, but there can be a lawful use of these mines, a responsible use of these mines. We just have to mark them and we have to fence them off. And then, of course, no civilians can tread on them, and therefore they will only kill combatants and they will be discriminate and they won't be unlawful. And I think Gus just set out so brilliantly all the reasons why this is just factually wrong. Because civilians don't have access to the map, so civilians don't know. The fences sometimes work and sometimes don't. And also the mines move, and not only do they move, they stay there for a very, very long time. I mean, when you think about, you know, states of Southeast Asia that you mentioned, when you look at Egypt, Egypt is still full of anti-personnel mines from the Second World War. No one knows where these things are by now. You know, they're in the sand, the sands shift, they move, no one knows where these things are. And it means that for all intents and purposes, these areas cannot be approached by civilians because they will kill civilians indiscriminately. And that also goes to the smart mine point, is if you're a civilian, so the idea of smart mines, what we are told is they self-destruct in a very short time, and so they will only be used against combatants, and then we turn them off or they turn themselves off, and no civilians will be harmed. But the fact is the technology is very old, the batteries of these mines are very old, there's a lot of failure rates of these mines. So again, if you're a civilian, you cannot approach these mines. You cannot approach the areas where these mines are because they will indiscriminately kill. And sometimes I really wonder, the next person who tells me that these mines are safe for civilians, I want to tell them, well, just send your child to play in that field where you think there's no danger for that child. And I'm pretty sure the person will not send their child to that field.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm glad that there seems to be a good relation between the various statements done that you could draw from the legal to the practical very easy in this conversation. Dayan, if I may, and Alma, if you can help me translate if it makes sense. Because I wanted to pick up on the point that they remain in the ground for a long time. And as we know, of course, landmines don't sign peace treaties themselves. But Dayan, you've been active both as a soldier, but then in the demining, and you've been working in the minefields. But that's quite a long time ago. And there's statements being made now of those who potentially then would make use of mines again, saying we'll use them responsibly, as we've discussed, and clear them immediately after battles. But with your experience, immediately after battles doesn't seem to happen, does it?
After war, I don't believe, because the war is on the one side, and I can talk about my situation and about Kosovo's, yes. So, and when we dislocate to Serbia, miners stay on the Kosovo, on the border. So, in my location where I was, I had accident. We don't have maps. We don't have anything. And when I inside in minefield, when I inside first time in minefield, I got my logistic how to move it. And we find landmines potassium.
Tripwire landmines.
Yes, and with logistic, I move it in minor files. So fire was opened to us, to my group, and we are very fast. To go outside, I stand on the landmines, and I lost my legs. So my friends were come to me, and they helped me to move it outside. One guy was on the book, on the paper, made maps. But he not was specially for officer for that. It was him idea. And what is happening? Couple days later, and he was accident in situation, and after that, him book is lost. So, and the next who was coming, and they don't have any maps. So, save maps is very, very hard. And very usually change and first line. Everyone who coming to next, he make new and new and new, and we stay one moment lost. You don't know where are you. So, I don't know how it, but in Serbia, in peace, well, it is clear, and they saving, and it is okay. It's normality, and it functions. But we talk when it's peace, and no when it's war. And war is definitely different than in peace.
Thank you. And I think the fact that so many countries have asked for extension requests in terms of the clearance operations proves the point that it's not necessarily a quick activity to do and make sure that the mines disappear as soon as peace comes. Madam Deputy Representative, you mentioned Mozambique, and you gave such an extensive, very, very rich statement. So I wanted to see, as you mentioned them, whether Mozambique perhaps is in the room. They are. And if they could respond to one of the things that the deputy representative spoke of in terms of the socioeconomic benefits that mine action has rendered and the broader benefits of the convention to Mozambique. I was myself based there running a mine action program, and we were, by the way, clearing mines that had been in the ground many years. So again, not a quick operation, if it at all is finished by now. Mozambique, am I putting you on the spot if you wish to say a few words? How has this benefited you?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, for recognizing us and for giving us the opportunity to share some views on this very important topic. Indeed, I believe all will agree that we are going through a very crucial moment for humanitarian disarmament treaties, as we start witnessing an increasing number of people, or rather countries, that are pulling out, if I use that term, from these treaties. So we, as a state party to the Convention on the Prohibition of Antipersonnel Landmines, we would like to use this opportunity to stress the importance of the treaty and to reaffirm our full support to the need for protection, respect, and application of the norms and principles that are contained in this treaty. And the importance of this treaty lies on the fact or ability of the treaty to save human lives and to promote human dignity, especially in communities that once were affected by armed conflict. And Mozambique is a country that has gone through many, or at least some, armed conflicts. So the fact that it's growing, the number of states or parties that are withdrawing from these humanitarian disarmament treaties, this causes us a lot of concern, as we consider this to represent a significant setback for the achievements made over the last few decades on this area. So we believe that the withdrawal from the Landmine Treaty will have significant consequences, among which we could name, for instance, the increase in the risk of landmine use. We believe that this increase will pose a new threat to civilians and humanitarian workers. The second immediate consequence will be, of course, the enhancement of humanitarian concerns, as we believe that landmines can cause long-term harm to civilians, including injury, death, and displacement. The third consequence that we'd like to share is that the damage of the international reputation that this withdrawal can cause to the treaty itself. So withdrawing from the treaty will certainly damage the international reputation of the countries and the relationship that that country will have to establish with the other signatory countries. We also believe that it is one of the consequences, the loss of international cooperation. So a country that withdraws from the treaty will limit the opportunities for cooperation and assistance from other countries and organizations that are party to the treaty. And last but not least, we believe that the withdrawal will increase or poses the risk of landmine proliferation, as we believe that withdrawal would contribute to the proliferation of landmines, making it more challenging to achieve global disarmament and humanitarian goals. From what I've just mentioned, we can easily conclude that the withdrawal from the treaty will weaken the standards against the use of antipersonnel landmines and would greatly jeopardize the progress that have been made so far by the humanity in this area. So the convention, of which Mozambique is a living example of success and commitment, is not just a legal treaty. We believe that it represents a moral pact between the nations of the world in defense of the most vulnerable. Mozambique was one of the countries that was mostly affected by landmines, and thanks to a joint national and international effort, was declared mine-free in 2015. We know from experience that humanitarian disarmament saves lives, restores hope, and paves the way for development. So in that context, Mozambique would like to call on states that are considering withdrawal from the humanitarian disarmament treaties to reevaluate such decisions in light of universal humanitarian principles and their international obligations. We also would like to call on reinforcement of the need for continued political, technical, and financial support for the implementation of the Convention on the prohibition of anti-personnel landmines, especially in countries that are still affected by mines. And finally, we would like to urge all states present and parties to work together to protect and revitalize the humanitarian disarmament regime by way of promoting universalization and full compliance with the relevant treaties. In closing, Madam Chair, I would like to reiterate Mozambique's commitment to remain an active member of the Convention and also to defend the preservation of the principles of and the norms of the Convention, and finally to promote a mine-free world. Thank you.
Muito obrigada. You mentioned something that has been mentioned by several others as well, which I believe is one of the beauties with this convention, of course, is that not only did it come with a total ban, which would prevent it from being used, but it also has a significant recovery component. Seeing the benefit that you spoke to, and I know from my own experience working in many of these countries that this has rendered a lot of this cooperation and assistance. And even though we know it's going through a dip in many quarters these days, for other reasons, we hope, it's something that should be revived and kept, even if we have to fight a little bit more for replenishing those coffers of means for that cooperation and assistance, of course. I wanted to turn back to the panel to see if there was anyone who had a reaction to any things that has been said. I'm noting we have Gus, unless he's fallen asleep, which would be understandable. Then I turn back to the audience and see if there's others who would wish to say a few words in reaction to what panelists have said, or whether you have your own thoughts with regards to the importance of these matters. I think this is the Finnish Red Cross.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the panelists. Thank you for your views. This is a subject I've worked on since I got back from the international conference at the end of October, because the situation, I can give you context. I was here at the convention meeting with state parties at the Convention on Cluster Munitions. I spoke with the representative of the Finnish permanent mission, and we were laughing about concerns that Finland might pull out of the Ottawa Convention. The world works in mysterious ways. Today is a very sad day for me. On a personal note, just a few hours ago, Finland voted in the parliament the second time to withdraw. Having done this work for 20 years, it is truly difficult to see my state, which has been a staunch defender and advocate of IHL, lead the way and open the door for something really unprecedented. And I want to just bring context to some of the things that have been said. I want to commend in the sense of, if you look at the parliamentary documents, the government bill, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has openly spoken about the reasons, about the achievements. There is much to be read, and from that you can read also that, in essence, the evaluation is that we underestimated how warfare would develop, and that the Ukraine conflict has changed the modern perception of modern warfare. And as was noted here before, it is stated in the Parliamentary Defense Committee said last week, in our strategic communication, we must be absolutely clear that the only reason we are doing this is because of Russia's aggressive action. This is not the government bill, but nevertheless, and that let's say the concerning things is that there is both in the government bill and elsewhere several references to understanding by allies. And this goes to what Cordula was saying about the silence being deafening. And I think that this is something for everyone here, in particular the state representatives. In order to defend the ban, the norm, and the convention, it would be critical to say, no, it's not okay. And that not to give the possibility for those to say, well, we have understanding because of the changing security situation. And as can be read from the documents, some of the points that have been made here, while there is implications, technology has gone forward, doesn't say that there are new mines or that we have any evidence that the humanitarian consequences would be any different. And in fact, it openly states that the main usage and the military significance of these weapons is more or less the same as when Finland joined. So there are no new indications of that. What is good is that the government bill recognizes the costs and consequences that might occur because of the withdrawals. What is unfortunate is that it is not understood the implications, and this has been absent in the public discussion about what this does, because it's one decision not to join, it is another thing to withdraw. Since what IHL treaties have done, there's one withdrawal, and I counted 26 current IHL treaties, 2,950 ratifications, one withdrawal. That is how unprecedented it is. But it also is presumption on the fact that the message is very openly that we need to be doing to defend and send a message. And with regards to responsible use, as an example, at the press conference announcing the withdrawal, one of the main party chairs said, "Let me be clear, the only persons who will step on a Finnish anti-personnel mine is an enemy soldier." And this has been repeated by also Defense Administration personnel. So this is I think it's important for everyone to be aware that this is the level of discussion and presumptions, and not be guided that something really truly has happened to show that the treaty is not needed, that these weapons are not problematic, nor that it hasn't had an effect. But I encourage all of you, but really it's important that speaking out now. So I want to sort of support what Cordula was calling for. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Hopefully we have recorded this session and maybe we can share that with the Parliament in Finland. They'll get lots of arguments if they haven't heard them before. I saw a gentleman in the back. Please.
Thank you very much. My name is Mark Wilkinson. I'm from Danish Church Aid. A question, if I can, please. It's perhaps not as widely known as it should be, but there has been some public discussion, certainly within the UK, relating to how the APMBC can be made somehow more relevant in the face of current global security challenges. And rather perversely, some of this has been pushed, at least in the media, by voices coming from within the mine action sector, where arguments related to the modernisation of anti-personnel mine fuses with self-destruct features are being actively pushed, almost lobbying national government to support a change agenda. The silence to this, as the term has been used already, has been quite deafening. What would the panel say to those within the humanitarian mine action sector who are using these arguments currently?
Thank you for that question. It's up to any one of you to respond, but maybe Gus, did you get that question?
Yeah, I heard the question.
Would you like to just give us some reflections back, if you can, if you wish?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been said already that what has changed in the security situation. Yes, there is a security threat to Europe. However, the purpose of the convention is a humanitarian purpose, and it's there to protect civilians and it's there to protect, international humanitarian law by not using weapons that don't discriminate. And for any country anywhere in the world, including Europe, is to start looking at ways to make that fit so that they can use them. Just doesn't really make sense to me. I mean, it's an argument, something that we've already been discussed already this afternoon, and that is, if you don't believe in the treaty, then you can't just write off international humanitarian law because you're going into a conflict. I mean, that's the reason it actually exists. So I don't see that there's any real argument to be able to be using them. But while I've got the floor, I think maybe it's good to hear maybe some of the states that are thinking about leaving. If I could give an example of the Australian Defence Force in Vietnam, who laid a 10-kilometre minefield, more than 200,000 landmines, and it proved within a very, very, very short time frame that this proved to not really do anything against the enemy. The enemy was able to breach in, was able to neutralise the mines, and then actually use the mines against Australian forces. However, there was quite a few accidents when laying mines, because mines are not just dangerous when you're actually clearing them and whilst they're laying there, but also the act of actually placing them is a dangerous act within itself. So if states are willing to take this on, then they should be aware of some of the historical events that have occurred. And this one specific minefield from the Australian Defence Force, there was 13 Australian sappers that were killed or injured whilst laying this 10-kilometre minefield. When it came to clearing this minefield, only some months later, 55 Australian soldiers were killed and 250 of them injured in doing so. What is the purpose for laying anti-personnel mines? The Australian forces within Vietnam received more casualties in actually removing these mines than they caused by the enemy. So this is something to think about when these states are thinking about trying to use these weapons, and it's not, it's a dangerous weapon when laying they're dormant and when removing. Thanks.
Thank you, Gus. Anyone else in the panel that would like to respond to that? Cordula first, and then Alma.
Well, just to say, there's two aspects. On the one hand, I think the evidence is quite strong. I mean, Gus just gave another example, and we talked about the fact that these, so-called smart mines really are not smart. So I do think we need to continue to make the case that the evidence doesn't bear out these arguments to the people who, as you say, advocate now for, you know, better minds, etc. So I think that is important because, you know, there are people who don't know very much the facts about, because most of us don't deal on an everyday basis with of course, landmines in our lives. And so I do think it's important to continue to talk about the evidence. I do have, though, and I have to admit this, no answer to the fact that evidence seems to be less and less relevant in this world, and facts seem to be less and less relevant. And I mean, what Jani Leino from Finnish Red Cross was just explaining is there's been a decision there in the face of facts that were just simply denied. And that I find really difficult to counter, but I wonder if that has to be countered by big campaigning, you know, that makes things a bit more graphic, because perhaps it is also the fact that you can discard the facts so much because the broad public doesn't know the evidence. And so to bring it to the broader public is still probably something that we need to do more. And of course, when you're in times when you think you don't need to do that, perhaps we did it a little bit less, but now is probably the time to do it again.
Thank you. Alma?
Just a quick view. I think I know what you're referring to. It's a debate of a think tank where a group of former soldiers, well, actually high military personnel were gathered, and they were all giving their opinion regarding the benefits of the use of landmines. And it's a bit of a sad situation that nobody from the humanitarian side managed to get even their thoughts across, because it was very military oriented. I think from the perspective of a campaign, the government of UK should approach and, as a state party to the Mine Ban Treaty, defend the principles of this treaty and not let this kind of, really contradict this kind of a debate on their national level. We do expect that such a government would be able to do so and defend the treaty that they are a state party to.
Thank you, Alma, for that. I note that Norway would like to say a few words as well. I think it's Anne-Karine Jaren. She's a senior advisor at the Section for Humanitarian Policy.
Thank you very much, Sarah. First of all, a huge thank you to NPA and ICBL for putting together this important event, and to the panelists for their presentations. So far this week, we have talked about the achievements under the Convention in very practical terms, and we've talked less about the norms that have been established. They're equally important. Central to what we've heard today is the protection of civilians. And for Norway, the protection of civilians dimension has been fundamental since the beginning, when the Convention was first adopted in Oslo. It is important to remind ourselves, the norm against antipersonnel mines has saved countless lives. These weapons still kill and injure civilians long after fighting stops. This message has been repeated today, and I'm grateful for it. These weapons don't distinguish between a soldier and a child. That's why the Convention was created, and that's why we must stick to it, especially when times are tough. Thank you also for shedding light on the serious challenges that the Convention is currently facing. US speakers have shared your concern, and so has Mozambique as an affected state. Norway is also concerned. We are gravely concerned about the new use of antipersonnel landmines in recent years. We are concerned about the potential erosion of the norms established by the Convention, and we regret the steps taken by several state parties in the process of withdrawing from it, one of the most effective global disarmament treaties in existence. However, the majority of state parties still firmly support the treaty. We as state parties, we have a responsibility to uphold and protect the Convention and should aim to be active members of it. To be clear, Norway has spoken up. We have done so publicly, and we have engaged with withdrawing states privately. We will continue to do so. We recognize that no single action can reverse withdrawals, but we are many who can help pull in the same direction. We are supportive of the Secretary General's push to keep up momentum towards a mine-free world through the campaign that was launched this week. And we will continue our efforts to ensure that the community of state parties remains strong.
Thank you very much for those words. I saw Peter Herby here over here wave his hand first, and I'll come to the gentleman over here.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I just wanted to pick up on the question that was raised by our colleague from Danish Church Aid about so-called smart mines, non-persistent mines, whatever you want to call them. I mean, this idea was discussed for 2 years in 1994, 5, 6, and it in the context of the negotiation or renegotiation of Protocol 2 to the CCW. And over 2.5 years of discussion, there was never any evidence presented about the reliability of self-destruct, self-deactivation mechanisms. It was an idea, and basically that you'd have mines that would blow themselves up or turn themselves off after a given amount of time. But there was never, despite repeated requests, evidence put forward about the testing and how reliable these mechanisms were. But then, in addition, the element, an aspect of so-called smart mines that isn't discussed very much is that most of them are remotely delivered by air, by artillery, by helicopters, and they can be delivered in vast numbers, hundreds and hundreds, just like cluster munitions, and at distances. And these mines will be even harder to find than mines that are hand in place because there are no maps. There's a general idea of where they went, but finding them is even more difficult. And the idea that you don't plant non-persistent mines along a border. You don't want to plant a minefield and it's going to blow itself up in a few months. So it's going to be in active combat areas. It's going to be in areas where they're going to be remotely delivered. And this, according to military experts that were part of the ICRC study in 1996, and again, a second update of that study at the first Mine Ban Treaty Review Conference in 2004, highlighted the danger of remotely delivered mines as having the potential to create even more appalling levels of contamination than we were already seeing from traditional anti-personnel mines. So the unreliability, the unproven nature, plus the potential for even greater contamination, I think should be quite sobering when people claim that this is going to be a humanitarian solution. It was presented and discussed in 94, 5, 6. It was rejected by the 125 states that adopted the Ottawa Convention and which the 165 that are now party to it. So it's just a myth. I attempted to quote an ICRC surgeon when this was being negotiated in Vienna in 1994, who said to a Vienna newspaper, "There's no such thing as smart mines and dumb mines. There are only stupid people who use mines."
Good quote. Thank you, Peter. Sir.
First of all, my name is Alexei Barbuk. I'm from Belarusian mission. I deal with disarmament. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers and of this panel, and to the Norwegian People's Aid and Norwegian for really doing great work in these very delicate and difficult times. First of all, I would like to make an analytical, maybe, comment, not official one. Really, the war in Ukraine made many states to rethink their strategies. Recently, just approximately a week ago, there was a modernized approach from Great Britain, and the war has really changed. So there are a lot of drones, many other appliances. But what is good, Ukraine is still in the convention. Of course, there are some problems, but they do not withdraw. This is very nice. But it's never good to underestimate the opponent. And I think that, or maybe partner, I don't think that Baltic states, Poland and Finland do not know the effect and military use of antipersonnel landmines. I don't think that they really count on this method of war, on this means of war. But probably it was maybe a step in this geopolitical escalation to show that there is no dialogue, and we really need this dialogue. Because if we take the experience of the Second World War, by the way, we are in one boat, Belarus, Ukraine, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and Finland, of course, and eastern regions, western regions of Russia. All the territories were bloodlands. We lost one third of population on average. Belarus lost more than 2 million people from 10 million people, 2.5, maybe 3. Lithuania, its population is 3.5 million people, and it lost 800,000 people from this not very big population. And now we're really escalating. So it shows that there is no dialogue. Maybe it's not possible to have this dialogue in front of, just on the stage, but it's high time to speak about it maybe behind closed doors. We have to stop this. Second thing, I have a feeling that the solution with this state that withdraw lies not in the Ottawa Convention. It lies in the protocol on smuggling migrants. Maybe it is not possible to name it directly because there will be a very hard pressure from human rights protection bodies, but it is possible to disguise it through protection from military perspective. Maybe it's high time to speak on this issue of migration also behind closed door, but we need to speak.
Thank you, sir. But I think that would require a different side event, because here we're really focusing on the Mine Ban Convention per se and the events that are happening in that context. So, but I hear that that's an analytical point that you want to make, and I'm sure you're going to raise it with relevant countries in that regard. I'm saying this also because I have not seen more hands flagged. Yes, I do see 2 more. I will take 2 more. I will quickly go back to the panel, but I realize that we're getting close to where everybody needs to rush somewhere else. So if I first give the word to Julia from Austria, you have the floor.
Thank you. Given the time, let me be just brief and thank you for this panel and for the exchange of views and some very important messages that we needed to hear and that we probably need to hear over and over again. And we, from an Austrian perspective, share a lot of the views that you have mentioned today, and we continue to speak out where we can. Joining what our colleague from Norway has said, we remain concerned about developments, and we continue to speak up about the absolute prohibition, about holding up the norm, reinforcing the stigma of any use, transfer, production. And this is a discussion that we continue to have, and we will also need to continue to have in this forum. And one very important message from today that I would also like to reinforce is this treaty is about human beings. We talk a lot about weapons, but at the end of the day, we want to save lives. Thanks.
Thank you, Julia.
Thank you very much. I'll be brief, as we do have somewhere to go afterwards. My name is Stefania from the Permanent Mission of Mexico. And, thank you. So I'm Stefania Padilla from the Permanent Mission of Mexico, and I thought in effort to respond to the call made by the panel for the middle to speak up, make a brief statement. So firstly, we'd like to thank the Norwegian People Aid, ICBL, ICRC, as well as South Africa for organizing an event on such a critical topic. We take this opportunity to underline, as our colleagues previously have, our commitment to the effective application of international humanitarian law. We reiterate that it is crucial to uphold civilian protection standards and the principles of international humanitarian law during, of course, times of peace, but especially in times of confrontation and armed conflict, which is what they were created for. We stress, as has been mentioned by the panel, that the supposed military utility of these indiscriminate weapons is far outweighed by the suffering and damage they inflict on civilians, the environment, economic development, food security of all affected countries during and, of course, long after their use. Let me finish by asserting that Mexico will continue its efforts in strengthening the APMC as well as the CCM, which was also mentioned, which both remain relevant just as much today as they were at the time of the redaction. Thank you.
Thank you very much from Mexico there. I turn to the panel. I know Alma has a plane to catch, so I give the first word to you.
She does, and I'm a bit nervous, but I would really like to thank my fellow panelists. I think that we shared some very important points, but I would specifically like to thank South Africa, Mozambique, and Norway. We really need these kind of statements be heard tomorrow at the plenary session, Mexico as well. We have to make sure that there is a strong call to states what we are expecting them to do and to defend this treaty. I wish we had more time to come back to the double standards that Stefan mentioned. It is something that is really important. Double standards are never good, but in this case, they just don't make any sense because a landmine would not be more kind if it's put in a European soil towards the civilian population. So let's move away from that thinking and let's speak openly and strongly against these practices of withdrawing states. We will continue to fight. Please do not criticize some of our actions that might go a little bit bolder, because we really do feel that we have to defend this treaty. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alma. I think that's an important point. This is a global initiative, and it has had a tendency to become a bit Eurocentric in the conversations lately. Very good point. Dejan, do you want to say two words, 2 lines?
I will try.
As you wish.
I will try. I just want to send a message to politicals that history will remember all decisions. So this decision about 5 countries to go outside history will remember, and them people, them civilians will remember it.
Thank you. You mean it will come back and haunt them? Madam Deputy Representative, Madam Sole.
No, thank you very much, Sarah Kane. I think some of the states that intervened did speak quite a lot about the need to dialogue, which we also kind of spoke about. And we said we really have to do it within the context of the convention as well. But I think everybody also in the room knows that South Africa generally does not, for an example, believe in megaphone diplomacy. And we always say, if we can't do it in public, let's sit in private and do it, which is also what Norway emphasized, to say, okay, we can talk in public, but we can also talk in private. If talking in public is an impediment, then let's talk in private, but let us not stop engagement, rather than have this tick for tack kind of response. It is not a solution. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Cordula?
Just to add my voice to say thank you to all of those who support the convention, to the states in particular, because of course your voices are very important, but also to civil society, and in particular also to those within the states that are perhaps not upholding the norms all the time, but within those states that are those who are trying their very best to influence the situation, and I think they deserve particular credit. Thank you.
Thank you. Stefan?
Well, there's no documented military advantage of leaving the Mine Ban Convention. And from an allied point of view, I think it's a concern that certain allies choose to invest in ineffective and obsolete weapons. But this suggests that there might be a broader political agenda which is playing into the hands of those who want to break down an international rules-based order.
Thank you. That will be the last word of the panelists. But what I realize here now is that there's so much that has been lifted up on the table. So I think this is just the beginning. We've scratched the surface on many, many arguments. Should say, have been mentioned before, but there's clearly something that has happened or gone lost in memory during the last 30 years. And therefore, I think, and I hope that this event has enriched your mental files, your file cabinets, and that you can use many of these arguments in your continued conversations, both in regionals, multilaterals, and bilaterals, as you feel necessary, and that we can be that middle ground who stand up and campaign for the relevance of this treaty. I want to thank the panelists, and Alma, who had to run, very much for your contributions, and to ICBL and MPA for giving me the opportunity to join in on moderating this panel. Thank you so much.